version of the ResearchFest, Learning ResearchFest, and start with the open plenary. After me, the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Annamarie Jagose, will say a couple of words, followed by Pip Pattison, our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Education. I'm sure both are known to most of you. Before we start, let me just say a couple of words of thanks in the beginning. I'll do more thanking in the closing session, but at the beginning I certainly want to thank our sponsors, FAS, and from FAS in particular the School of Education and Social Work, which contributed to, in many ways, to this event. The program, it has been and is available online. If you want to look it up, have not printed it out, it's on the CRLI online.net website. And it's a program with 5 symposia and roundtables covering a wide range of topics and experts and expertise. We have a poster show in the middle in which you can participate by voting, and we have a best poster prize announced then at the closing session. And the fest will end with a presentation from Professor Patrick Olivier from, well, still Newcastle University upon Tyne in England, I believe, but as of this week, mainly Monash University, Melbourne, Australia. The day will provide you with many opportunities to learn something new, or to maybe look at something to see something new you're already familiar with. And so it's about time that you think about your learning goals for today. One goal we have is that you learn more about learning research in the University of Sydney and beyond, and we hope we can provide you with a sense of that during the day. Having said that, I'd like to ask Annamarie to kick off the event from the faculty side.
Thanks very much, Peter. I didn't know I was going to be asked to do anything as athletic as kick off an event, but I think I can say a few words that's probably more suitable for this hour of the morning. So welcome to the CRLI Learning and Innovation Research Fest. I love the idea that it's called a fest. Seems like it has a sort of celebratory quality to it that I think is something too often missing from our academic everyday lives, and something that's worthwhile pausing and celebrating the things that we are doing well. I never quite know how to pronounce CRLI, and I notice people say different sorts of things. Some people say CRLI, which sort of makes me think of, I know, those tiny crustaceans swimming in schools that whales like to slurp up, and that doesn't seem inappropriate. A kind of micronutrition, I guess, for we educationalists. And other people, I think, say curly, which suggests another kind of angle altogether. But I thought it would be worth thinking to start about what in 2018 is distinctive about the University of Sydney. What kind of work have we done in the last few years, oriented, of course, around our strategic plan, which we're midway through at the minute. What can we lay a claim to that differentiates us to some degree from other tertiary institutions in our proximity and not? In research, I think we can probably lay a pretty confident claim to our strategic focus on multidisciplinarity. Obviously instantiated quite literally in the multidisciplinary initiatives, the 10 of them around the university, but also in an emphasis generally on the value of multidisciplinary research. And in teaching and learning, I think similarly underpinned by our teaching strategy, driven of course by PIP as the DVC education, I think we can also lay claim to a recent focus on project-based experiential learning, often focusing on real-world complex problems. That's to slightly undersell the full breadth of the teaching and learning strategy, but I think it's an important combination to think of those two things together. We are, of course, a university, and thus our core business are teaching and research. But too often we don't bring those two things together in relation to ourselves and our daily practice. And I think that's an important thing for us to do. That is, we don't often enough bring together our multidisciplinary strength to solve complex problems in learning and in innovation. And the research that we do in education here at the University of Sydney doesn't always directly inform the ways that we approach teaching and learning across the institution. And that seems like a missed opportunity to me, and something that this fest and CRLI generally makes a little bridge across in a way that I think is very valuable. We often speak to our students about the value of the challenge and the learning that comes from working on a genuinely, richly contextualised organisational or community problem. And yet the university is one such organisation, and we need to recognise, I think, that questions of teaching and innovation are our own authentic and richly contextualised problems. So, more than ever before, as I hope is becoming clear to you, I think that our new transformed curriculum demands that we take a learned approach to how we teach and how we understand our students to learn. And I also think that our colleagues in CRLI are leading the way in that project. They're conducting fundamental and applied research on learning processes, learning outcomes, and the diverse conditions that shape learning generally. And as we commit to the brave new world of our transformed curriculum, with its work-integrated learning, participatory learning, its interdisciplinary requirement and so forth, it's more than ever crucial that we continue to develop and disseminate innovative, research-based approaches to learning. Thanks.
Thank you, Annamarie. And I would like to hand over to Pip Pattison. Annamarie already mentioned that Pip is, in her role as Deputy Vice Chancellor, overseeing a whole range, an amazing range of innovation activities in the teaching and learning space at the University of Sydney. We blame her for many things. And so we thought we might give her, and should give her, also would like to hear from her a bit what she thinks about the role of research in this and her enterprise.
Thanks so much, Peter. Yes, I'm very aware of being blamed for many things, and I think it's probably a fair cop. But I am very grateful for all of the work that everyone's doing, and I think we are starting to see some really tangible responses from our students in the new parts of the curriculum who are pretty happy. But thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and I do wish I could actually stay for the whole day. I think the program looks wonderful. And I'm also really thrilled to see that the theme of this plenary discussion is advanced learning technologies. I think there's so much to be excited about in terms of the possibilities. We need only think about the possibilities of things like virtual and augmented reality and other immersive and or feedback-rich technologies. There's also the design challenges that these and other technologies pose. How to design learning environments and learning activities, including the interactive ones that Annamarie has spoken about, that take best advantage of some of those possibilities. And then the third kind of real opportunity is the richer data that a lot of advanced technologies provide for understanding the very complex human learning systems where everyone is acting, interacting and learning in a wired world. We really do have the luxury of returning again and again to a rich observational record of what's happening, and that allows us to refine and test our evolving theories, I think, in much richer ways. And I'm sure you'll hear from Michael Jacobson and Judy Kay some of the ways that illustrate those points in rich and wonderful ways. I think their work is absolutely marvellous. And of course, with all of the innovation that we're talking about, the commitment we've made to authentic problem-based learning, the use or consideration of new technologies, a need for research kind of screams at us, as Annamarie has said. And so I too would like to acknowledge what I think is the outstanding work that I've always called it CRLI. I can never remember whether it's RL or LR, but CRLI is and has been doing for a long time now to support research on learning and innovation. And I think it's, I'd like to thank not just the centre, but the community of scholars around the university who are interested in research on learning and innovation, because I think we depend on you critically. As I said, I can't underline enough the importance of research. We need rich and well-tested conceptual frameworks to support our innovation and design efforts, and we need compelling evidence to develop and test those frameworks and support broader adoption of the most promising innovations. Without research, we do nothing with confidence. And indeed, I see innovation and research are kind of twins that are, each of them is essential to our efforts to improve the effectiveness of our educational efforts. And if ever there was an example of a mutually catalytic relationship, I think it is between innovation and research. Research shapes our conceptual frameworks, and our conceptual frameworks shape our innovations. And Peter asked me to comment very briefly on the kind of research that might work best for us. And I think that is a terrific question, and I think it would be a great question to discuss. And indeed, I know you've got a panel talking about the grand educational challenges. I especially like to be here for that. I think research in higher education, particularly in Australia, has sometimes been criticised for having a cottage industry flavour to it. Many small-scale exploratory studies, often conducted by instructors in their own context, but what are sometimes seen to be not enough large-scale multi-context studies to test the big ideas about educational design that might have system-wide impact. Meta-analysis, of course, is often used to search for more integrative findings, and I think it's important to note very clearly that the pattern of research that we see in Australia is very much explained by the structure and quantum of funding opportunities for educational research, especially in higher education. The funding opportunities are quite simply just too rare. But within those constraints, and I don't think they'll change in a hurry, although, believe me, I use every opportunity I can to argue for more funding for education research. There may still be things that we can do. So, for example, I'm a fan of exploratory studies. I think we learn an enormous amount from them. I think they drive our conceptual frameworks in incredibly valuable ways. But we could perhaps do more to make our frameworks explicit and interrogate and test the differences amongst them. And so I think this discussion that we're about to hear this morning on what are the grand educational challenges is really a very helpful step in that direction. I think we could possibly also increase the impact of our smaller scale studies through the use of more, the injection of more design into the studies, so that we actually look at a structured suite of activities rather than just a single activity, and build some comparison and contrast that's often a little bit more powerful than simply the testing of a single idea. And I know many people use that approach successfully. I also think we can collaborate more across multiple sites to do research on shared questions. And of course, occasions like this are terrific for helping people work out where some shared questions and interests are, and then how they might collaborate. As a university, of course, with our 70,000 odd students, we actually got a lot of learning going on. So if we can think of ways of interrogating that in ways that make sense and that can address one question across multiple contexts, that can be quite valuable. So let me finish by reiterating my thanks to CRLI for initiating and hosting this annual event, and to all of you for your interest in the twin drivers of improved education, innovation and research.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Pip. I think indeed one of the original motivators of starting and setting up CRLI was to also provide a means for integrating all the many research activities that happen across faculties, often, as you said, integrated in colleagues teaching directly, which is a fantastic resource to keep the context and the specific disciplinary background in the picture. But there's also, I guess, space for integration and working on common themes. So before I hand over to Michael and Judy to start with the introductory, the first substantive event, I just wanted to address one question that you seem to have, what CRLI, how we pronounce it. So CRLI is one way. It stands for Research and Learning and Innovation, or it could as well be Learning and Integration. But Annamarie was wondering about shared her associations about the ResearchFest with us. Annamarie, maybe it helped historically. This fest was located in October. That might give you an idea, together with my background. A second point was the pronunciation, right? So I think we're sharing in CRLI, we say curly, like my hair. But I should mention that I think Peter Goodyear suggested this, and he knows me much longer than you do. And so that's curly. I want to now hand over and ask Judy and Michael to give a short presentation each, and then guide us through the first panel. Michael?
Okay, let's... Well...
Yeah, you go further. It's wrong sequence. Where are they?
There we go. Okay. Yeah. So I'll... Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and indeed an honor to be able to lead off the first keynote session for our ResearchFest. I was just reflecting that the first one that I participated in, I can't remember if it was the first one, was 10 years ago. I've now been at the University of Sydney just a little over 10 years, and can't believe that a decade has indeed passed. Oh, let me get the full slide showing. Yeah. Okay, well, this particular session is one that we wanted to make more interactive than typical keynote talks are, which are generally talks for an hour or so. And certainly us professors can easily do that, so we thought we'd show some discipline and try to be more focused in some of our presentation of some ideas, to then leave hopefully about half of the session to have a discussion with you, our audience. With this session, we are actually formally announcing the formation. Oh, whoops. That'll go away. The formation of the Advanced Learning Technologies SIG. This is, the choice of the words is meaningful to us. It's about advanced learning. It's about advanced learning technologies. And it encompasses actually a range of things that have been ongoing for a number of years at the COCO Research Center, which predated CRLI, and with now is underway at CRLI. So what we'll be doing is having short 7, 8 minute overviews by myself and Judy about some of the research that we've been involved with. And then we have a panel that I'd like to be involved with the discussion part, and we'll have the panel members each speak briefly about some of their highlights of their research and some of their ideas about this Moonshots thing. And then we'll be having our consideration of what might be grand challenges that we have in education and learning, and how might there be possible moonshots to help address these. Now, where'd this moonshots thing come from? How many of you saw a special on CNN, I think it was in August, on moonshots for the 21st century that was hosted by Fareed Zakaria? Oh, no one. You should. He's good. In this special, he selected what he felt were 5, using this metaphor, of course, of the first moon and the amount of effort and research and so on that culminated in putting a person on the moon. What he felt would be the 5 moonshots that might have the most impact on human history now. And so cool things like sending astronauts to Mars, 3D printing a heart, my goodness, that's kind of cool. Creating a star on Earth, fusion power would be quite something. Flying to New York, from New York to London in an hour. Well, that'd be great, but we can't even get across Sydney in an hour, but anyway, I think that might be a bigger challenge. Mapping the human brain. Now, achieving these 5 areas, and I highly recommend, check the podcast on that session. It's really quite good. But I would say that these moonshots are predicated upon people figuring out, that is, learning how to do incredibly complex, difficult, challenging things. Interdisciplinary teams are absolutely essential for being able to achieve these kinds of ambitious challenges and goals. But my humble proposition is that impacting human history the most is most likely to come from making fundamental advances in our understanding of how people learn. So let me share kind of 3 areas that have been kind of kicking around in my brain and some of the research that I've been involved with. So the first is what I would call what we learn with moonshots. And, given the ALT, we've got advanced technologies in there, that's a pretty interesting one. I'm a kind of a techie guy, so this is sort of a natural for me. So really using advanced technologies for learning. And the focus of research that I've been doing with funding from the Australia Research Council the last 8 years has been focusing on virtual reality, virtual worlds, immersive kinds of experiences for students to be learning about science. It's been the focus here. And so I've got, if you like to read papers, I can give you papers. If you want to see a video, I've got a video I made on some of the research called Glimpses into Future Learning. So that's certainly one area. Now, with colleagues of mine, including people on the panel, we are putting together now a new research initiative, and we're looking for some funding to help make it go, that would be combining artificial intelligence with virtual reality with application in medical and health education. Surprisingly, there's been very little work internationally that's been combining AI with virtual kinds of experiences. And we have really great folks. Judy's work in the AI intelligent systems kind of area is internationally regarded. And anyway, combining these things and then with colleagues that are interested in different kinds of applications that we could be having in medical education, particularly ways to be learning in these challenging areas that then can facilitate the ability to transfer, apply, to be able to use the kind of knowledge you get in formal settings in very important and difficult, challenging clinical and professional settings. Now, the second moonshot area that I'm interested in might surprise you. You might just think what we learn, well, you just got to learn certain stuff. But I think that we've got some insights now that I will credit Uri Walensky, a research colleague and friend at Northwestern University, with really kind of putting the bug in my brain about this area. Think about mathematics and how mathematics has been done. And think about how it was done a couple thousand years ago. And if you had to learn about it. Well, if you were in the West anyway, you would be using Roman numerals. I can't even count in Roman numerals. Can you add in them? Can you subtract? Can you multiply? Can you do quadratic equations? You get it. It's really hard to do mathematics with a representational system like what the Romans cooked up with. However, if you change the representational system to the Hindu-Arabic type of numerals, then suddenly students, virtually all students, learn the basics of mathematics and more advanced mathematical ideas relatively easily. More advanced stuff is challenging for some, of course. But that change in the representational system probably took about 1,000 years to really get rolled out. But it's been transformative in terms of the abilities we now have to do more advanced kinds of mathematics. Now, Uri Walensky has called this a restructuration, that we change the representational infrastructure that's being used for how we think about and use knowledge, and that has enormous implications for how people can learn the knowledge and skills as well. Now, what Uri's been advocating, and it's really been informing a lot of my own thinking, is that really learning about more advanced, challenging ideas, say about climate change, complex systems in a number of different areas, physical and social kinds of systems. In the past, you needed to have advanced mathematics, differential equations, calculus and stuff, to really understand the ideas related to how those kinds of systems will function. What Uri's proposed is that we can be using changing the representational infrastructure to be using agent-based models and kind of computational, algorithmic thinking as a different way to be presenting these kinds of ideas to students, and that students can then in turn learn ideas that we may have thought would have been way beyond what they could possibly do. So like I said, he calls this a restructuration, and I think it's a very powerful idea. Now, the third moonshot, this will just be a real quick and dirty for some research that I've been doing to try and combine these first two areas. It's been said that the transfer of learning is universally accepted as the ultimate aim of teaching. However, achieving this goal is one of teaching's most fundamental problems. However, we actually have had over the last 30 years or so a considerable amount of theorizing and empirical work on how to create conditions for successful learning for transfer. It's been the focus of my research since my PhD at the University of Illinois, back in finishing up in '91. Analogical comparisons, Deirdre Gentner's work, Gentner, who Micah Goldwater had worked with as a postdoc at Northwestern University, the work of Manu Kapoor on productive failure. So let me just very quickly give you the highlights of a study. This was a paper that was published in Learning and Instruction, our number 4 ranked journal in educational research. In this study, we used agent-based models. We tried to change the representational infrastructure. Agent-based models of climate change and complexity. And not only did we do that, we were also exploring the use of productive failure as a learning approach to see how using these models with productive failure or using these models with more traditional types of teaching, direct instruction, if there would be some kind of a difference. Or if the technology by itself would be sufficient, well, great. What we found out, what we report in this paper, is that for learning more information, what I would call declarative knowledge, we have comparable learning outcomes by direct instruction compared to productive failure. But in our assessments of conceptual understanding, explanatory knowledge, can students explain how or why things work the way they do, open-ended questions, or giving students new problems to solve that had not been presented, including one that was in a completely different subject area, a far across-domain transfer item. We had significantly higher performance by the students who experienced the productive failure approach. And this was controlling for time. The same amount of time dramatically enhanced learning outcomes. So, and this is an area that we're continuing to follow up on, of course. So that's a real quick overview of some of the work that I personally have been involved with, which has involved some other colleagues, both here at the University of Sydney and in other institutions. So we will consider in a few minutes what moonshots you might want to do. But before that, we'll let Judy speak a bit about her research, and then we'll have the panel members, and then we'll start our dialogue. So thank you.
Whoops, that's not me. Okay, I'm the computer scientist in the audience. I just wonder, since everyone's here, could I have a show of hands, right hand up if you consider yourself a computer scientist, left if you don't, both hands if you don't understand the question. So everyone should have at least a hand up. Okay, yes, all right. Compliance is about the same as my classes. Okay, not a lot of computer scientists here. My passion is to work out how to build technology so it serves people's needs, and I'm really excited that we're talking about bringing our teaching and learning and research together, because nowadays our students sit at computers so much of the time, perhaps too much of the time, some of it learning, and we have an opportunity to do so much. So here's my first moonshot with a blurry diagram. I'd love to help build shared understanding. Lots of people have problems in learning because of failure to understand. Teacher and learner, I know exactly what I want the students to need. Well, actually, I'm not too sure I do, but I mostly do. They don't. And I fail to communicate it, and that's a serious challenge. They also, some of them, know what they want to know, and I don't necessarily understand that. It's a great empirical study all the time. Teacher and teacher, we need to talk to each other a lot. I hand my students on to other people. I have courses taught ahead of me that I rely on. But we also want to learn from each other. When I teach something and it works well, how do we share that? Learner and peer, we do a lot of work here where we encourage students to learn to work with each other, and we really need better tools to help that. And finally, when people use computers, and although this picture's symmetric, you'll notice neither of these look like a computer. And I think it's really important, and a deep part of my research, that if you're talking with a person, well, it's okay if you don't have particularly good shared understanding, because that's the way people are. We'd like technology to help. But when I'm using a computer, we have no excuse for designing it so it can't explain itself, because that's how we hit Facebook problems. And they're now in the press. I'll come back to that. So how might we get there? I really don't know, but let's start. I have this bias called learner modelling. So I'm an engineer with a hammer and everything looks a bit like a nail. And one of the things we looked at was curriculum mapping. And what is it? A systematic definition of a subject where the teacher says what the learning goals are. This is a chance then to share them with the students, maybe to clarify them in their own head. Then link each teaching element to it. Current tools, learner management systems, don't make that nearly easy enough. And there are a lot of HCI issues, many of which we have made lots of mistakes on, so we've learnt a lot of things not to do. It's not an easy task. And to frame the assessment, because that's where you can let a learner see how they're doing, to celebrate their victories and their progress. It's also to share with teachers. And so what's some first steps we made? This was really for teacher-teacher shared understanding, where we did detail curriculum mapping of a whole lot of programming subjects in the so-called programming fundamentals. Then you could use all the stuff you've got to compare two courses. This is one subject on the right, this is another one on the left, and you can sort of see their different bias. They're actually pretty similar, and beginning programming courses are. This is another one that a teacher has mapped out their course, and they've used, in this case, Bloom levels. They can, because we're computer scientists and we make things complicated, they could use anything they liked. And we also had Neo-Piagetian levels. But you could put your own in. And then you could come up taking all the data you have about student learning, and the light green is what we hoped the top performing students would do, what mark they'd get, so longer is better. The dark green is what we hope the bare pass students would do. And I don't see nearly enough mention of this, but to me that's, we need to worry what a pass means, and we don't really make that clear enough. And in the middle is what actually happened in the cohort you're looking at. The teacher chose this. We found this very interesting, but frankly we learned it was much too hard to do. The only people who coded up about 19 subjects were me and the PhD student. Gives you even more data, but too hard to do at the moment. So lots of things that are hard, deciding the right granularity of topics, which depends on who you're going to share it with. Defining the learning level. When we did this with computer scientists, none of them really knew about Bloom and much less neo-Piagetian, so we had to teach them that first. Then doing the mapping is damn tedious, and we've now had a few experiments where we've built interfaces that are actually not too bad, and quite a few interfaces where it was terrible. And then the whole issue of meaningful assessment, because if we say we really want you to learn things and we never measure them except in an exam that doesn't measure them, well, there's a terrible clash of understanding and anyway. So what are some hard challenges? Enabling the course designer to define and maintain this, what I would call learner model, and for the learner to map their knowledge against it. So another part of this whole vision is when groups are working, and this is where I will ask again, how many people have ever worked in a group? Right hand if you have, left if you haven't, both hands if you don't understand the question. I'm always very consistent here. Okay, so nearly everyone's worked in a group. Put up your right hand if you've ever had a bad experience working with a group, a less than optimal, left if you never have. Do I see a left hand? No, excellent. I think that's pretty par for the course when we've done student surveys about group work. Thing I liked best is often the group work. Thing I hated most is the group work. So how could technology help with that? And I worked with Peter and chose this example because I'm showing you failures and successes as well. We thought social translucence would be good, and what we have here is circles for 3 different sources of data. Doesn't matter what they are, I'm not going to explain. Normally there'd be people's names around it. Each dot is a student, and the clock position's consistent. It's a logarithmic scale, and the nearer the centre you are, the more you did. You can see the red dot person is working hard on everything, or appears to be. And this would be a way for people to start a conversation. Why does it look as though red's doing all the work? We also then did this, who's collaborating with whom? They're meant to be working together, creating a document on a wiki. And again, same idea, dots, the thicker the line, the more the people edited the same page. This person here was meant to be the team leader, which is really frightening. But you know, you can see these gross statistics tell you you've got a problem. We actually went on to other things that look like this that I'm not going to explain to you, except that the main thing was that if you clicked on any of the dots, you could get all the detail. Worked better. And then the last one we did was a classroom which we're the only people stupid enough to have run a whole semester with 2 whole subjects using a tabletop classroom. And in the middle you can see the tutor who put up with all the misery of our technical challenges with a dashboard showing him what everyone's doing. This is not the one he's looking at, but it's one that another teacher used in another class. And for each table you can see something that tells you how they're doing. A beginning of a conversation if you only had the one for the table. Other exciting thing we did with it was the top line here. Again, you don't need the details. The top line was the lesson script, what the teacher wanted. And each of the rows is what actually happened. And you can see most simply that the green bit is taking far too long compared to what was planned, and so the class didn't work as intended. So lots of challenges here, collecting the right data and making it available in the right form. So when I get now to Moonshot 2, which is my current part of my current big passion, enabling learner control. I mean, the world has gotten to the point where everything's so damn complex, none of us even can believe we're in control. I don't know if that's better than, is it better to be aware that you're not? I don't know. Learner agency, which is not quite the same. It's a sense of being able to make things happen. Responsibility, I think that's got to go with it. And we don't really combine any of those enough. And I think metacognition for all, we know that our top learners have good metacognitive skills. And in my field of AI Ed, we've got a huge number of studies where we have demonstrated that we've failed to improve the metacognitive skills of weaker learners. There are a few successes, and some of it is building culture and all sorts of things that are probably outside technology, but must be understood when we're building technology. But I particularly want to look at the issue of what because of the picture, I had to call it digital exhaust. Learning footprints, I often call them. Lots and lots of approaches, but the thing that's really coming up now is these books that are appearing telling us how bad things are. And all the terrible things we do with data. Frankly, we do pretty terrible things with graphs. I mean, our current learning analytics standard for students is to say, oh, you got 73, here's the distribution of the class, and this is where you are. I mean, one of my passions would be at least to change that to say, this is where the teacher would like you to be if you want to be successful, and this is where you are. Damn where everybody else is, because it's not relevant anyway. Some of the things that have happened, this is not my work, this is Word. Who thinks they know? I won't ask you if you think you know all of Word. It's growing. It was probably bigger today than it was last week. It has 1,000-ish features. So the blue here is stuff that one person appears to use a lot, whether they know it is a different issue. The red is what people like them do, and then the bottom one is showing a comparison. To me, that might be the sort of thing we might be able to do. Another thing here is showing me in learning Java in the top row in green. Blue is how the group's doing, and should you always judge yourself against the group, you can see that shown in the middle. Whoops, and that was my stopping point.
Okay. At this point, we'll transition now to our panelists. So they'll each speak briefly, and then we'll commence with some discussions. So, take it away, Phil.
Greetings. As Pip knows, I worry a lot about the curriculum. So my Moonshot's probably a good curriculum for the future for the students. Just briefly, Toby Walsh from New South Wales University recently published a book called AI, 2062, The World AI Brought You, which has shaped my thinking somewhat, where he has a rather dystopian prediction for the future of Homo digitalis. And he's talking the powerhouse on Sunday, I'm not going to go and see him. In fact, but the point is 2062, they predict with at least 60% accuracy that machines will be as smart as us. And by 2111, there are 90% chance it'll happen. And that was kind of cool and stuff. But then I thought, my God, the students that are 20 now in our classes will be 60 then. So this is all happening on their watch. And that sort of got me a bit excited. I run the National Academy of Biomedical Science Committee for the Academy, and we just launched a decadal plan for 2030 for education because it's causing us sleepless nights. And people like Dan Pintos, we're in the conceptual age now, and the kind of workers that need to exist in that age are ones that are creative and empathisers, okay? And I think thanks to Pip's curriculum, what Annamarie said, I'm starting to see students with some real empathy and creativity, which is really pleasing. And I think the moonshot is really how can humans and AI exist in symbiotic harmony? I think that's a big challenge, okay? And Ken Goldberg's got this concept of multiplicity. I think you can read it there for yourselves. Right? So it's really starting to conceptualise how humans will have to behave in the future. And in terms of my research interests, this whole XR thing, that interface between machine and human beings, I think will play some sort of critical role. But we've got no research to back it up at the moment. This is I've only got 2 slides because I'm very short. I just love that picture from Beeple. But I just put these 2 quotes up there from Marina Umashi Bears. And it's really, we always emphasise how important literacy is and communication, etc. But they make this rather wonderful point that also coding is also programming, is also a literacy. And in the future, this very, I find very powerful statement there, those who can't read and write are left out of the power structures, their city voices are not heard. Well, this will be the case of those who can't code, right? So the students, are we creating the right kind of students to exist and lead and take part in discussions in the future world? And so that's my moonshot, and I think all these things have to impact on how we educate our students. So, thank you.
Okay, so who do we have next? You? Yes.
Hi, hello. So much of the stuff I'm working on is a similar theme, slightly different perspective from what Michael was saying, where I'm looking a lot at fundamentally how people transfer their knowledge, which again is a very old problem. People have been talking about this for a long time. And now with many decades of research, I think there's some basic principles about this that we can harness for how we design education and use technology. So for example, there's too much stuff on this one slide, but so one of the things that doesn't work, cognitive psychologists keep on trying to do this because everyone really wants it to work, but it just doesn't, is when you sort of learn some task and you just sort of hope it helps you on some other seemingly unrelated task, right? So you practice, well, what if you learn chess? You become better at math? No, right? So people think, oh, well, they're both involved like thinking hard and logic and stuff, so maybe it transfers. It just doesn't really. Or, something like, oh, what if you're just practicing music? Well, we like music, and maybe that'll help you with math. And so just practicing music alone won't just suddenly transfer. You have to be very explicit about how these things link, right? So so these are just some history, some insights that I like to, some examples that I remember easily for whatever reason, where, so what does transfer is when there's actually shared structure, shared sort of conceptual structure. The structure of the ideas, the principles are shared, not just they both kind of engage the same kind of thinking or something like that. Right. So, for example, the invention of Velcro was based on of burrs being stuck in a dog's fur because the actual physical relationships there are shared. Or the Dyson vacuum was a transfer from understanding how a sawmill works. Right. So, sort of changed how vacuum cleaners work. I believe this was Claude Shannon's master's thesis. I guess it's okay for like a 23-year-old to map Boolean logic onto electric circuits. Right. So, and so the basic idea is that since we sort of now we sort of know, so a lot of my work is looking at, well, what is the kind of cognitive neurological processes that support this kind of transfer? So we're doing both brain imaging work around these kinds of things, sort of grounded in theories of cognition, as well as thinking about how we design technology. So we think technology really gives us unique opportunities in the classroom to really help make these cross-disciplinary ties explicit. All right, so for example, the kinds of technology that Michael was talking about with those agent-based models are sort of used in every field. You can sort of look at almost every field, there's some example of how those agent-based models are relevant. And so by applying the exact same tools and making those links explicit, you should actually be able to get people to sort of not have these siloed different topics where they see chemistry and biology and something else completely unrelated to each other. They actually, are, even though, so the experts might see how they're connected, but students don't, right? So you need to, explicitly make those connections the object of study. The object of education is these connections across these areas if we want people to sort of be able to transfer their knowledge across different contexts. Is that a moonshot? I guess the moonshot is having people be able to do that. Thanks.
Right, so my moonshot is based on a vision of an ecosystem of intelligent learning assistants or learning agents. And to contextualize this a bit, I was part of the first wave together with Judy and many other colleagues around the world in the first wave of AI in education, artificial intelligence in education. And believe it or not, that's already happened 25 to 30 years ago. That's when I had more hair in that phase. And I lost it about all the worries about AI in education. So we learned a lot of things in the first generation of AI in ed, which have a bit got a bit lost, made a lot of mistakes, but also some things have been developing continuously over the 20-odd years or so, and it always stayed as a niche, right? So who of you, I love Judy's way, left arm up, who of you has encountered an AI tool in your school or university education? Well, maybe, yeah, okay, some, or at least it was marketed as such, I reckon. My guess would be, I would have been closer to zero, would be so I don't think that you have encountered much of a real AI tool yet. for learning purposes, other than in some niche areas. So there are some very good ones out there for mathematics, for instance, in particular geometry proofs, algebra type of things. And there are some much less, but few out there on science, particularly mechanics, Newton mechanics, and things like that. And in the first generation, but now AI is in everybody's mouth, and AI education is again in everybody's mouth, much more people now. And so I'm looking at this and sort of wonder what has changed over the last 20 years. Is there a reason for this new excitement? Are we just seeing another hype wave? And of course, we hyped some things up 20 years ago, along with expert systems, which sort of have died away or have a niche existence. So instead of looking at technology changes, and they definitely have changed, right? So the main move from over the last 20 years or so is machine learning, right? And what's now AI, also AI in education, is very much identical with machine learning and data-driven approaches rather than knowledge-driven approaches. That makes certain things easier, like authoring these systems. You don't need an author in a sense, or at least that's the belief. But it makes other things harder, like this new generation of AI systems, given the way they are built, basically don't know what they do. And so you have to trust them, right? And we have all this discussion about ethical algorithm and so forth, and those apply in education, of course, dramatically as well, and will, just because of the nature of the game. So I don't want to bore you with technical details, and I don't understand some of them anyway, not being a computer scientist. But what I see also happening, and maybe that's more important even than the technical changes, or not to be separated from them, the two are synergistic, is a way of distribution of how development of AI in education will be distributed. And I'm sort of thinking about this as sort of three areas that sort of form an ecosystem. And one area, and that's the important change, is no longer do educationalists and teachers and educators like Judy and me develop AI tools. It's basically driven by industry, right? So AI tools, things that can do work like medical diagnosis or describing pharmacies, that will be developed by industry, not by teachers and educators. That is very important because the failure of the first wave of AI to become a mass technology and mass used and creating equitable access to education worldwide was that to build these systems, you had to be an expert in a great many things, from programming to domain knowledge to pedagogical knowledge, and it all had to be essentially in one person or one small team. Now, I think what can develop, given the way technology and the internet has provided connectivity and technology is changing, we can see a quite different kind of infrastructure that can create new AI systems and new interesting tools for education. And I think a core element is that it's no longer, teachers and educators are no longer needed to build intelligent tools that are intelligent and useful for education. If you have a tool, let's say an add-on to Excel, in the next 3 years, I hope that Microsoft will also have a module for Excel that can do accounting pretty much on its own, a good part of it, all routine accounting. There will be a version of Word Docs that does most of legal documents by itself. They are very routine. Conveying, for instance, conveyancing will be gone, right? I mean, no human unit. Word will do it for yourself. So Microsoft will build, and others will build systems that can do that. So that's the key driver. And then, we can think of education systems such as universities and schools to add to that, to add teaching, pedagogical intelligence. That's more our business and what that means. I call these facilitation tools. They facilitate to learn from these more task and problem area driven tools. And I think that then needs to come together with the learner. So the learner also, the individual learner has his or her own set of tools, basically have to do with metacognition. Judy already mentioned the importance of that, regulation of one's learning, planning of one's learning. Also planning and helping with finding others, social, sharing learning with others in a self-organized way. That will also can be supported by AI, and hopefully will. And so my sense is that this creates, a much larger potential, at least. We haven't seen the realization yet, but we might, in some form or another, that AI in education might become indeed a mainstream technology or approach different from the first generation. However, and this brings me now to the challenges. I mean, one challenge obviously is to create this ecosystem and with all its components, huge challenges there, but very nice ones. There are other challenges as well, and they have to do more with the social and ethical side, right? So, I mean, now really dramatic, with any technology, these questions come up, but I think with the rise of AI in education, from kindergarten to lifelong learning, we see an amazing range of challenges that are not so much technical, but social and ethical and political. So there's the curriculum, of course. What knowledge is worth learning and what skills are worth mastering when humans have easy access to cognitive tools? Hopefully, many of them will be free or provided by the government to all its students in all its public schools. What does it mean to learn indeed, and how to assess and certify learning when the learning system is a person plus intellectual hybrid, and this is very important, the tools learn itself and becomes better all the time? I know of no way of assessment currently done that can deal with that. And there will be, we need to have not only advancements of assessment methods, but a real rethink of what assessment means. In particular, all these tools also not only on your hard disk or on your phone, they talk to each other all the time, right? They are interconnected. So if somebody learns rhythm better in China at this hour, an hour later, that learning might be available in some way on my application as well, right? The whole system learns in all its nodes. And I don't know how I would assess that for the individual learner now in my class or course. No clue. Who will produce these tools? Who will own them and who will sell them? And what does it mean for equitable access to education? It's more than buying a grade or a mark on some site for an essay. It's a much more fundamental way of being able to purchase cognitive power. And finally, what will universities have to learn, and other teaching education providers such as my school? What will we need to develop? What will teachers need to know? What will lecturers need to know? What will trainers in industry need to know about this? What new capabilities, knowledge and skills will they need to put this emerging technology to good use? I think these are some of the big questions. And for learning research, which I always try to bend things back to, it means that I think we need to understand theories and models of cognition better that are distributed over brains, bodies, symbols, tools, and both physical and digital tools. And we need to learn to design for systems that can support this kind of distributed learning. That's my moonshot. Thank you.
Now is this working? I guess so. Judy, why don't you come up and I'll stand up and then I'll pass around the mic, since we've got a mic that's working. One of the things when you think about the grant challenges, I guess it's very easy for all of us then to think about all the sub-challenges that there are, and that's obviously important. But for the AI thing, I think Peter's point about this as a grand challenge, I think it absolutely is. And pointing out that this really is kind of a second wave of attempts to kind of apply research related to intelligence and artificial intelligence and so on, more generally, as well as in education, is upon us. But I'd like to make a point which I don't know if others on the panel would agree. I would say what is being called machine learning or artificial intelligence now is actually not about intelligence, and it's not about learning. What it's about is pattern finding. with the big data, we have these amazing algorithms that can pull out patterns. And they pull out patterns that maybe human beings might have difficulty being able to notice or to discover. And so then that becomes very useful, I would say, to a human being, that certain patterns can be identified because of these technologies. But if you take that kind of view of how, say, the moonshot of using these kind of technologies in society more generally, as well as in education, that you have a very different way of thinking about how we might prepare students to be using these advanced pattern finding technologies. But if you take the view that these are actually intelligent in the way that human beings are, then that's a very different way of conceptualizing the technologies. And I would suggest at this point, one way of knowing whether or not the systems might actually be intelligent is if they're aware about what the pattern is that they found. And I'd say the answer to that right now is probably not. Melanie Mitchell, who's a noted researcher involved with work on genetic algorithms and stuff, had an op-ed in the New York Times a couple weeks ago, I think, really making that point. But anyway, that's just my kind of 2 cents on this new wave and my use of AI. And so my work, I'm really keen on finding certain kinds of patterns and then being able to use that as part of tools both for students as well as for teachers. Well, I guess we'll open it up to questions now. So are there either questions about what has been talked about, or do people have challenges or moonshots that they'd like to propose to the group? Who's brave enough to go first? I'll go on. Okay.
Okay, sorry. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so interesting. I'm a little bit disconcerted, though, to be honest, because in a sense, these feel like they're two things. One is they feel, in a sense, incremental. So I think there isn't really, I haven't seen in what people are talking about sort of recognition of the reason we're interested in learning. So the reason we're interested in learning in terms of what sort of society we want to live in and the associated politics of that. So I was sort of thinking at a university maybe we'd be thinking about, well, I see these visions, when I look at these visions, there's a role for universities in all these visions. And I think, we're a little bit guilty of that. I wonder if, I'm interested in sort of moonshots where essentially we're going to engineer a world where we don't need universities, for example. I think when we go back, we're going to have a panel about this later maybe. It's sort of thinking about the way we teach now. So we have all these educational experts, but we look at the practice of teaching and learning in universities everywhere. I don't know about Sydney, but everywhere I've been. And certainly we don't put, as Pip was saying in the introduction, we don't put our understanding of learning into practice, but we don't even leverage the configurations we have of students, the numbers we have of students to innovate in learning. And I think there's a sense where as institutions, universities propagate the sort of society, the sort of stratification, the notion of these transactional models of learning. So I don't know, I guess my moonshot is really trying to engineer a world where we don't need universities.
Okay, well let's hear it for putting all of us out of work, and all of you who are students, you have a bright future ahead. Does anybody on the panel want to comment?
Okay, I think that we could have framed things more grandly. We know that education correlates with lots of other things like life expectancy and any number of other measures that we know we really care about. And we didn't touch on that, and we don't really understand why. And I personally am very wary of saying, well, there's a correlation, so let's pump more people through uni, and then we'll fix our social problems. And I think that's very unlikely. I guess the one thing I would say is that the AI world is all about what I think is simplistic analysis of large amounts of data. And the HCI world is not against that, but would always say you've got to sit down and do these detailed qualitative studies to understand what the hell it means. And I don't know that that answers your question, though.
Anyone else? Okay, I guess another question? Yeah.
Following on the first comment, I wonder how we can insert the heart in all this we are talking about. My research has been concerned, well, I'm a literacy teacher, and literacy for me is to think about how we build a better world. That's Paulo Freire's main philosophical point. And when I'm in a place like this, and this is a new building, and I don't think this space is conducive to learning, and I wonder, when are we going to think about how the learning environments we design, even the digital environments, they nurture sensibilities in our students. My research draws a lot in cosmology, but not on the kind of mechanistic cosmology. It's a proposal where human beings are closer to nature, are closer to space. Our relation with the world is not only through the brain, through the mind, through the heart. So I would like to hear how human-computer interaction is approaching this other type of learning from the heart, this connection which can really tap on the human being's sensibilities.
Okay, thank you. Anybody want to comment on that?
Thank you. It's the ironic answer would be that we wait for the 3D printing of the heart thing to happen. But I don't want to diffuse the argument. But I was just wondering if you mean if what you are saying translates basically to motivation in teaching and learning, which has been with the field and in education and in psychology for a very long time. And also in education, of course, we have particularly adult education, quite a few models of andragogy and so forth that I think address this, come on articulate that position. How that translates into technology, I'm not, but Judy can say more to that. I guess my naive answer would be, as all of us are carrying these powerful computers with us and do a lot of things that go beyond just cognitive learning or the formal curriculum, I think much of that deeply personal engagement with knowledge and others, epistemic activities is happening as we speak. If that's theorized in HCI or so, I'm sure it is, what isn't, but that would be one answer. I think in psychology we definitely try to make contributions to that since basically the start of psychology in its motivational research aspects. Judy?
Well, only you talking about the heart reminds me of Diamond Age. I don't know if you've read that. And I think science fiction is probably a great way to come up with a million ideas to explore some of the really big ideas. Because, of course, you don't have to build it. You can just write it on the page, which I shouldn't minimise because, I'm not a novelist. It's a book about a child who is very underprivileged and who is basically coached by a computer system from her perspective, but it's actually got a human being at the other end. So it's actually kind of interesting. Yeah, I mean, heart, the reasons that people don't make the best of our education system complex. Patrick's comment, I mean, those who are sitting here probably think a university education is good, and is it right for us to say that that's the way things should be? I mean, maybe there are people, maybe there's a very different perspective, and maybe we can convince our politicians. The world is complex, and there is a real risk that if your moonshot is too big, well, maybe if it brings in a lot of money so you can do cool research, that's nice, but you may not actually make any progress.
I think the 2 points that I like that you made, clearly the room that we're in is a lecture theater. It's designed for direct instruction. Somebody down here is saying stuff, and folks out there are supposed to catch it, write it down in some kind of a way. This, as a pedagogical approach, is extensively used all around the world, many universities, at almost all levels of education. We have direct instruction. My hope for some of the research that I'm doing is to basically have kind of that, a moonshot, if you will, to show that there are other approaches that we can be doing that show the limitations of this commonly used kind of approach. And if that research can be scaled up and generalized, then I would myself hope that we would stop doing direct instruction, because I think that we have other kinds of techniques that can be much, much more effective in the same amount of time. And actually, when you see students going through classroom experiences with productive failure learning kind of designs, they're actually really engaged, they're talking, they're collaborative, they're enjoying what they're doing. I would argue that their hearts are being engaged in affective components as much as the cognitive. So, and my sense of the other research that my colleagues have been doing as well, that we all really are trying to get the kinds of experiences that would be helping to educate the whole person. And that could be a nice way of framing a moonshot.
Just because Peter said I'm a biologist, I should answer the hard question, but I want the hard question. As I said, I'm coming from a curriculum perspective, so pretty much a lot of what Patrick's saying. I'm really worried about, so I teach first, science students and other students, and most of them are effectively clueless about the digital world. They're great at Instagram and stuff, and they're lovely, wonderful people. They're so smart. They're amazing. They learn very fast if you give them a challenge. But, we've got the Finster down in Canberra, that chief scientist, telling everybody that mathematics is the problem, right? And so we're going to spend the next 10 years making maths teachers to go back to school to make better mathematicians. That'll be 2030, when the machines are halfway there, potentially, and our students still are clueless about that digital world in which they live. So to answer the hard question, I think really you have to be, like in my slide said, you have to be literate around that, understand how that works, to extract the good and the bad bits and put the heart back into it. Because I think that's really the challenge that we face, and it's really quite a tough one. Because Canberra's, everybody's against it. It's all about mathematics. It's not stats.
So one way that some of these suggestions, I guess, have been realized in around, motivating content and, really connecting it to other situations, sort of their real-world problems and other kinds of things, is there's this trade-off where, just relating it back to this kind of notion of knowledge transfer, where sometimes when the content's really engaging, people just don't see how it connects to anything else because it's so rich in its learning context. And so actually really sometimes really dry stuff is actually more transferable across multiple contexts, right? And so, but obviously you sort of want to be able to engage both of these things, right? So you want to have this very, here's this real world problem that is dealing with an ethical, societal issue and all these things that people motivated, but you still also have to have this kind of, if you want people to, say, in the world of educating people how to use technology and things like that, you still need to have a way to go back and forth between the kind of model and this real world context. And it's very hard work to actually get all these things at once, because there often is this trade based on how cognition works, is there's this trade-offs between some of these different kinds of things, and so it takes really good design to actually have both transferable outcomes and actually be engaged in like a content that is important to people. So.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that we're getting to the end of this particular session. There's many other things. I'll turn it over to Peter for any final words that he might have about the rest of the session. But I want to thank all of you who asked things and shared things, and for all of you for being at this session.
Yeah, thank you, Michael and Judy. I just wanted to point out the next what will happen the next hour. So as you leave this room, the posters are up, and there are also technology demo sessions. That's in you'll find signs in rooms 100, 102, 115, and 117. That will go on for about an hour, so please interact with the posters and the demos. I'm sure that's fairly straightforward. And this will be followed by a catered lunch, basically in the area just in front of this room, and that will extend from 12:20 to 12:50, meaning at 12:50 the first round of roundtables will start. You'll find room numbers, etc., in the program, and enjoy the poster session. And don't forget to vote and be a judge and engage with the demos. Thank you very much.
Our conferences also, you know, the way we communicate to each other as experts. You know, at conferences, that's what we do. We don't.
The difference is that you are going to able to present something that you probably wanted to talk about,
Yeah.
as opposed to being told to read in a conference to somebody who.
But the other thing is, you know, those management courses I went to, said, you know, if you want your employees to learn, you have to block out time for them to learn. And it's the same with students. And it's the same with me. If I want to get vision, I've got to block out time. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. And, you know, having a scheduled time that you come together to do it makes a huge difference. And what really worries me is that in the engineering faculty,
speech.
See, I think the issue is really not that lectures are bad, but for students who are, kind of at more of a novice or early stage to intermediate, they actually do not have the schema to be able to understand what's being talked about. And this is why I think the importance of productive failure is you set up conditions where students do some stuff first, so that they're activating some prior knowledge that they have that's relevant. And then you actually are doing the teaching, and it can be pretty much like a lecture. But
I mean, they could also
yeah.
book,
I actually
see what they want. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I actually think there's probably some efficacy to having a person do it. We've tried doing some studies where we had students do online, basically instruction consolidation versus an instructor doing it. I think there are certain kinds of knowledge you can have. But you see, but if you do not have that initial activating of the prior knowledge, then you're not, for the students that are at this kind of early to intermediate level, they will not benefit. They'll get the declarative knowledge. That's what the study.
which is a start, of course.
That's not the start.
Well, sorry,
You got to do both.
Yeah, okay. Not necessarily that's the right order, but by the end, if you don't have the clarity of knowledge, you don't have to talk about the subject, right? You don't know the meanings of words.
You need to learn both together. That's what this research is showing. That you can learn the information, the declarative knowledge, and the explanatory procedural knowledge simultaneously. You don't learn the declarative and then down the road you learn the explanatory stuff. So the implications of productive failure are really quite important because in the same amount of time, and actually for the instructor that's got the lecture worked up, you can probably get pretty much the same lecture, but you got to have that critical initial opportunity for them to generate ideas, to kind of explore those.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, when you think, there's a little bit of expect that you are. Typically, those are pretty good doing it, until lectures lose the plot.
Yeah.
And the problem is not just the others, it's the audio as well.
Well, I also think there should be, but I bet no one watched the video.
Yeah, they do. It's good enough.
But I have to get statistics. I think, again, technology also makes it worse. If they come to lectures, they're all on Facebook and whatever. But I think some sort of tools to help people, for example, take notes or something, and maybe get some feedback at that point, and not get the ideas or not.
But you see, I think the technology allows us to create kind of virtually authentic experiences. So you use the technology not to help them take down notes per se. You use the technology to let them have some kind of an experience that relates to what it is that you need to have. And then you can have your lecture. Then you can have your more formal instruction.
And I think for pragmatic teaching, the other issue is how do you examine the community? If the word gets out that all you need to do is regurgitate the stuff that is on the slides, which is probably true, and you can learn it the day before.
Yeah, I mean,
It's very efficient to go and have
there's
that time
there's definitely also this issue around things like, right, I would rather just give people integrative essays, but then it's like, well, how much time? It takes much more time to mark than multiple choice questions,
and
right?
there's a
You
huge
know,
amount of cheating.
Yeah, right.
It's
So
a
they're
large
all
round
these-
multiple choice questions of huge amount of
Right.
I reckon we just say, forget it, basically this important. Forget us and just sit down and talk to people. You and I may say, we get a choice of 3 topics for us to do that, we've got 2 minutes to talk about it. You'll know in 5
Oh,
seconds.
that's right, because how much time do you spend reading their essay? Maybe that's fast.
Well, you could just say 10 staff, sit down and do it a couple of days.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, see, this is more like kind of a project. The project is built to explain.
Video of the hills,
Yeah.
I got another question than maybe. No, I mean, it's a real.
Well, you see, this is where the basic research, because if you're just doing the research on learning in the constraints of teaching university courses, it's going to be impossible, I think, to really try innovative new kinds of things. Where we're going to need to have the more basic research done in kind of different settings, and then we need to get some folks to try and roll it out into university class where they've got some research base to say, yeah, maybe my kids really will learn much better if I do a productive failure